Hey everyone, Mr. Harvey here. Let's continue our lecture. We are on chapter 16, ladies and gentlemen, and today we're going to talk about a couple of different topics. We're going to start off this lecture, ladies and gentlemen, talking about philosophy, science, and psychology, and then we're going to end this lecture, ladies and gentlemen, talking about changes within racism, developments within racism during the late 1800s and early 1900s, and we're going to talk about anti-Semitism. So let's get started, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to talk a little about philosophy. We're going to talk about Friedrich Nietzsche, and we're going to be talking about this movement during the second half of the 19th century, where we're going to see philosophers very similarly to that romantic movement that we saw earlier in the 1800s, ladies and gentlemen, of where we're going to see philosophers and philosophical thinking question rationalism when it comes to talking about humanity's development, humanity's problems, this notion of this revolution, this revolt against rationalism. And one of the most important thinkers who's going to do this is Nietzsche. Now, Nietzsche is not just going to question rationalism. He's going to have many different ideas. He's going to question rational thinking, but also Christianity, democracy, nationalism. He's going to be questioning science and the very notion of progress. And in his text, The Birth of the Tragedy, he's going to be making that fundamental argument of the importance of the non-rational aspects of human nature, and that argument that they are just as important or noble as the rational characteristics, which is very similar to Romanticism that we saw, right? That movement of subjectivity, of emotions, of passion, that kind of revolt against reason, that revolution against reason, as it is resulting from the French Revolution, the Enlightenment, the Napoleonic Wars. He's also going to have very strong feelings in that he's going to declare the death of God in Christianity. He's going to be promoting this notion that democracy illustrates weakness, the weakness of humanity. He was very critical of race, of anti-Semitism, and he also had this belief that there would be the arrival or this coming of supermen, super beings who would embody greatness and kind of lead and influence humanity. But the biggest notion that I want you all to understand is that Nietzsche is arguing the importance of feelings, the importance of emotions, and is questioning rationalism. And he also believed, very similar to Rousseau, that humans create morality and could create a new moral order. Remember, if we go back to Rousseau, right, the noble savage, that society has corrupted humans, and that through the general will, the will of the majority, humans can reshape society, reshape and recreate a more moral society. Nietzsche believed that too. He very much believed that humans create morality, humans create society, the environment, and therefore they should create a new moral order. Now, part of this kind of retreat of rationalism and kind of rebellion against rationalism is because, well, there's a lot of science going on during this time. There's a lot of rationalism that is taking the forefront of European thought, and of European intellectual thought. And that is because during this time, we've already talked about it, during the 1800s, we saw this with Darwinism, natural selection. Science is making rapid advancements and is really, changing Europe. And during this time, during the late 1800s, during the early 1900s, we're going to see tremendous advancements in science, kind of like a second scientific revolution. We're going to see new research concerning the electromagnetic spectrum, X-rays. We're going to see new understandings of radiation, new understandings of the atom, atomic particles, radioactive materials, subatomic particles, electrons, neutrons, protons. The notion that some elements are radiating, that some elements have radiation. And obviously, as we're getting kind of closer and closer to, ladies and gentlemen, the splitting of the atom and, atomic energy, atomic weapons. So some tremendous advancements in science. Max Planck, his quantum theory of energy is going to promote and advance this new understanding of energy, that energy is a series of quantities, discrete quantities, rather than this continuous stream Einstein, his theory of relativity, this notion that time and space do not exist separately, but rather as a continuum. And I kind of gave you a video here, a YouTube video that kind of details more of the theory of relativity. But this notion of relativity, that time and space move relative to each other, and that video can kind of explain Einstein's thinking. We have Werner Heisenberg and the uncertainty principle, this notion that the behavior of subatomic particles is a matter of probability rather than exactly determinable cause and effect. What's important about this, ladies and gentlemen, these huge strides in science, these huge advancements in science, is the notion that the physical nature of the world is much less exact. It's much more ambiguous. Humans don't necessarily completely understand how the physical world, how the universe works. And there's some uncertainty with that. But also, we're seeing these advancements in math, these advancements in science, physics, is going to also play a really important role in economic progress in life, in the military, as I alluded to before, with atomic weapons, atomic energy, and health, in medicine. And so huge strides in science during this time, ladies and gentlemen, that are going to have huge implications in Europe, but also in the rest of the world as well. All right, and here are two important scientists. There is Marie Curie and Pierre Curie, who were very important to this scientific movement during the late 1800s and early 1900s as well. Now, we're also going to see tremendous strides, not just in understanding the physical world, physical nature, but also the human mind and psychology. And we're going to see this theme to explore beneath the surface, or kind of beneath public appearance. And so we're going to see a lot of thinkers making strides in psychoanalysis, psychology during this time. And one of the most important thinkers is Sigmund Freud. And his early studies were on psychic disorders, and he's really going to focus on sexuality, sexual matters, and theorize that human beings are sexual from birth through adulthood, that sexuality, that human sexual drive does not just arrive during puberty, but is an innate quality among humans. And he believes, and he's going to promote this notion that sexuality is really a basis of mental order and disorder. He's also going to be really interested in dreams, and he argued that dreams result from unconscious wishes, drives, and desires. And one of Freud's major ideas is that the internal mind is based on the struggle and the construction of three entities, and we're going to go through each. You have the id, the superego, and the ego. The id is kind of like human instinct, the driving instincts of the human. Sexual gratification is one of Freud's major components of instinct, and a major component of the id, according to Freud. The second entity within the mind is the superego, and that's kind of society and culture, social norms, social ethics, culture, and these are the imperatives and expectations imposed on the personality by society and culture. So that's the superego. And the ego is what negotiates the relationship between the id and the superego and kind of mediates both and how both work together. All right. But what's really important about Freud, ladies and gentlemen, is he is acknowledging the importance of the subjective, the importance of human subjectivity, emotions, dreams, willpower, sexuality, but he's trying to rationally understand that. So he's really taking both sides of the spectrum, the importance of the subjective and objectively trying to understand the human subjectivity, if that makes sense. So he's trying to scientifically understand human subjectivity. All right. Now, another important thinker within this is Carl Jung. This is Freud's student. And he's going to have some of his own unique ideas when it comes to psychology. He believed that human subconscious contained inherited memories from a previous generation, almost a little bit like reincarnation, and that these memories combine with personal experience to create and constitute a human soul. And he also saw value in religion. And so Carl Jung had some different ideas from his teacher, Sigmund Freud. And here is a picture of Freud and some of his students and fellow thinkers. All right. Now we're also going to see some new ideas when it comes to rationalism and politics. And Max Weber is a really important thinker within this field. And he regarded the emergence of rationalism as a major development within human history. And he saw the bureaucratization of as a really basic feature of modern social life, in that people develop, and he argued that people develop their own self-image and self-worth from large organizations. And he also argued that non-economic factors might account for developments in human history. Now, there's also going to be this thinking regarding collective behavior, and this is the belief in the necessity of collectively shared ideals within society, and that people are guided by collectively shared ideals, and that collectively shared ideals are very important within a society. All right, and proponents of this theory kind of differed from Weber. All right, let's talk about racism. All right, we're going to see, ladies and gentlemen, with some of the developments within science, and we've already kind of talked about this with social Darwinism, the white man's burden, which I've talked about with evolution. Developments in science are going to have a tremendous impact upon racial understanding and the notion of racism that we have been talking about ever since we started this class. And what's important to understand is, and I'm going to go through this pretty in depth, ladies and gentlemen, is that racism is going to change from something that was predominantly in the 1500s, 1600s, and 1700s, something based on culture. That doesn't necessarily say that there was, phenotypic features like skin color were associated with that. But we're going to see that that notion of more cultural racism become much more scientific and biologically based. And that's going to be some of the justifications for racism, more rooted in science, more rooted in genetics and biology. And so we're going to see, ladies and gentlemen, it's really important to understand a transition of a more biologically based racism in the 1800s, late 1800s and 1900s. Okay, now very important, like I said before, racism has existed since Renaissance times. Racism was very prevalent within the Age of Exploration and so on. All right, and Renaissance explorers displayed racism towards non-European groups and were very oppressive and discriminatory towards non-European groups. And we've talked about that with the natives and other indigenous groups, and with towards groups in Asia and abroad and in Africa. And it's important to understand that prior to the late 1800s and 1900s, and especially in the 18th century, biologists and anthropologists classified human beings according to skin color, but this racism was much more based in language, culture, and social norms. All right. In the late 19th century, early 20th century, ladies and gentlemen, race is going to be very much connected to the biological sciences, be very much rooted in racism is going to be very much, rooted in science. All right, and we're going to see this notion of racial science, social Darwinism, genetics, okay, biology, modern science, this racial science, be used to support this notion of superior and inferior races throughout the world. All right, and this is going to be this development of a racial science is going to be used to justify racism. And there's some different thinkers that are going to be associated with this. We're going to see Gobineau argue for the Aryan race, about the Aryan race, and argue that the Aryan race, this white Aryan race, is weakened by inferior races with different races having children and breeding. We're going to see Chamberlain, who was very anti-Semitic. He believed through genetics that a superior race could be developed. Now, when you look at Gobineau and you look at Chamberlain, you can see some obvious influences that we're going to be seeing later on within governments, within politics, within society with the Nazis, right? This notion of an Aryan race, of superior and inferior races, and this notion of the superior race. So the big point that I'm trying to get at, ladies and gentlemen, is we're seeing a definitive connection with racism and science, and a justification trying to use science, trying to use this racial science, using genetics, using biology to justify racism. All right. Now we're also going to see a connection of racism to nationalism. Now, if we think back to kind of the old notions of nationalism that we talked about earlier in the 1800s, old nationalism was very much defined by literature, liberals, history, a common language, right? Wanting to redraw that European map based on common language, based on common culture, based on common history, and very much promoted by liberal figures. Now we're going to see this new nationalism be very much defined with racism through race, blood, and biology, and is very much going to be opposed to the ideas of liberalism and socialism. And so we're going to see this new nationalism lead to huge movements of racism within Europe and North America against African groups, Native Americans, and other various groups. And this new nationalism is going to become a movement of mass support, be well financed, and be very much connected to political parties. It'd be very racist, very aggressive, and is going to be personified with some of the parties that we're going to be seeing, notably the Nazis. And we're going to see that within Germany after World War I and during the 1930s and the interwar years. And so we're going to see a new nationalism very much connected to racism, this notion of inferior and superior race is very much connected to science, and we are going to be seeing that play out in Europe, but also throughout other areas as well in the United States as well during the late 1800s and 1900s. Now we're also going to see a rise in anti-Semitism and the notion of Zionism during this time as well. Very important. Remember, we have been talking about anti-Semitism ever since we started this class, ladies and gentlemen, right? Think back to the Black Death, right? Who was a scapegoat for the Black Death, right? Well, we remember the Jewish populations were being blamed for the Black Death. Anti-Semitism, and I want you to think all the way, right, from the Black Death and us talking about the Inquisition, right, all the way up until now. We have been talking about the anti-Semitism and bigotry towards the Jewish population within Europe, and we're going to see political and racial anti-Semitism during the late 1800s and early 1900s is going to be heightened due to attacks on rationalism and the developments of some of these racial ideologies that we're seeing connected to science. Now, like I've talked about before, anti-Semitism had existed since the Middle Ages. It had existed even before that. But we're going to see a resurgence of this with the Jewish population being allowed to participate in civil life, their entry into the financial sector of Europe with some of the enlightened reforms that we've seen, right? Granting of full citizenship and more religious equality. We're going to see a resurgence of anti-Semitism in the late 1800s and early 1900s, and we're going to see it all throughout Europe. But one of the most important episodes and symbolic episodes of this anti-Semitism that we're going to be seeing at the turn of the century is the Dreyfus Affair, which is very important for us. So let's make sure we take really good notes on this. All right, Alfred Dreyfus, he was a Jewish French military captain, and he's going to be accused of passing secrets to the German army, and he's going to be sent to prison. Well, the case is going to be re-examined as secrets are going to continue to flow to Germany, and the evidence against Dreyfus is going to be found to be forged. Now, what's important about this case is going to very deeply divide France between conservatives, the Catholic Church, military, political conservatives, and liberals, radical, socialists, Republicans. And you're going to see, the anti-Semitism really kind of come out into the open in France during this time. And Dreyfus is eventually going to be acquitted, but it illustrated that anti-Semitism and that division, not just in France, but also within Europe. And what's important about this is that no matter the extent to which the Jewish population assimilated, no matter the extent to which they were very, very connected to their different countries, they were still Jewish and they could still be blamed for problems and scapegoated. And this is going to eventually launch the Zionist movement in Europe. But again, ladies and gentlemen, it's just going to be illustrating that those anti-Semitic ties in Europe are there. And we see it with the Dreyfus Affair, and we're going to be seeing it again later on, especially during the Holocaust that we're going to be talking about in World War II. It will be there, and during the 1930s. Okay? All right, ladies and gentlemen, let's talk about Zionism, and we will stop this lecture. Now, Zionism is a notion promoted by Theodor Herzl, and it's going to argue that liberalism will not protect the Jewish population, and he's going to argue for the creation of a Jewish country, a Jewish state, where Jews can be assured of their rights and be protected. And this is going to appeal to the lowest and poorest of Jewish populations and eventually lead to the creation of Israel, which we will see, ladies and gentlemen, after World War II. But it's this notion of a Jewish state, this notion that the Jewish population needs their own country. All right, and there is Herzl. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's it for today. Thank you so much for listening. In the next lecture, we're going to be talking about women and modern thought. Thank you so much.